And we're back with closing arguments for the Tom Girardi trial. So here it is, the big moment. The attorney's summing it all up for us. And I can really just sum it up in just a few words. The prosecution argument, this was a Ponzi scheme. The defense argument, sick old man. And so we'll get into a little bit more details than that, but that really is the core of those arguments coming from the prosecution and the defense. There's a little bit of a technical motion that was filed the day before closing as well that I want to touch on briefly. But before we get into that, Stuart, what was your thoughts? What did you think? What do you think about this closing argument?
Well, I first want to say that we've been reading Amanda Bronstadt's articles at law.com, and she is fantastic. She's been doing a great job.
She really has.
I think the law.com, if you go to their website, these articles are behind a paywall, but you were saying that if you go to the X, Twitter, and you go to Amanda Bronstadt's handle there, you can actually get the articles for free. Is that right?
Yeah, you can actually just follow her on Twitter. She's been tweeting during the trial, and then she puts the articles on there, and you can get to those and read them.
All right. So the closing was as we expected. The prosecutors are sticking to their line that this guy committed fraud. He knew what he was doing, and he should be held accountable for it. The defense is still on this idea of, look, he's a sick old man. Have some sympathy for him. Don't hold him accountable. He's 85. He doesn't know what's going on. The lights aren't on. The lights are on, but nobody's home.
Right.
I think was one of the comments that was made by the defense attorney. So no surprises there. I think the real issue is, does this jury come back today, which is Tuesday? I would think this is a relatively straightforward case to discuss for the jury and deliberate on, and I would expect that they would be back sooner than later, but who knows?
Yeah, I would think so too. I think we probably are going to see a decision, a verdict today. If I was a betting man, I'd say maybe by lunch, maybe not. So there was an argument that the defense filed a motion on under a case that was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1960, Parr versus the U.S., and it had to do with the fact that when people are wiring money or using the mail system or interstate communications, and it's a type of thing that is mandated by law, then you can't really be charged for wire fraud. And so it was a case that came out of a tax collector's office. So people were sending in their taxes, as you're required to do, and then people within the tax collector's office itself they were stealing the money. And the case held, well, that's not wire fraud because the money, they didn't use the mails and the electronic services to get the money. That was happening already. They just stole it once it was there. And so the defense argued that's what's happening here. Tom Girardi had to get these wires in for clients. It was mandated by the rules and that lawyers had to follow. And he only stole it once it was already inside his firm. But that case has been distinguished by a number of other cases that say that, no, if you're getting the money by wire is part of an overall scheme to steal the money, then it is wire fraud. You're still guilty of wire fraud. And that's really what the prosecution is arguing here. And I think that's why they were really skewing towards this argument of this was a Ponzi scheme. Tom Girardi had an idea of taking clients' money before it was even hit the firm. He knew what he was doing. He knew how this worked. And, once the money came in, he was going to take it. And for that reason, he still can be charged and ultimately found guilty of wire fraud. I think the prosecution has the better side of that argument, but I thought it was interesting in the closing that the prosecutor specifically was calling this a Ponzi scheme and talking about how Tom Girardi had this idea of stealing clients' money even before it even hit the firm so that he could pay off the older clients. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, and this reminded me of the whole Bernie Madoff issue out of New York. What was that, 15 years ago?
Yeah.
Where there was a Ponzi scheme there in investments. And the same thing was happening here with Tom Girardi. And, it could have started innocently, Keith. I don't know how it started. It could have been very malicious, too. Maybe Tom Girardi was just a despicable human being all the way through this. I don't know. Maybe he was a very good man and got caught up in this idea of winning big cases, and then he's got to finance those cases going forward. So he starts keeping a little bit of the money back so that he can continue to finance the cases. And in his mind, he's thinking, I'm really doing this for the benefit of my clients, so this is a good thing. And then ultimately, you get to a point where you've got to bring in new big cases and win those so that you can pay off the old clients. But of course, you're not paying the current clients. They'll come in the next case that you get, the next big case. And at some point, that all ends. The house of cards comes tumbling down, and there's people that are left with nothing. And in this case, it's people that are very sympathetic, people that came to Tom Girardi for help, trusted him, and they're now being screwed.
Yeah, that's right. And to go to this point of that this was a Ponzi scheme, we were on a podcast yesterday, Zach Peters, No Filter podcast, and we'll put a link to that podcast in the description below. And he has been following this whole saga from 2020 all the way through. And he made a number of interesting points. But one point that was salient to what we're talking about here is he was saying it was just, from his point of view, it looked like it was just all one big piggy bank. The money came into Girardi and Keese, and everybody just feasted on it. Kamon, Girardi, everybody. And that literally would be a Ponzi scheme. You know, you cannot do that as a lawyer. You cannot bring in client money and just feast on it. You have to keep it separate. You have to protect it. The clients share that money. It has to be protected and accounted for, and you have to pass it out to that client. You're not allowed to use it and then replace it with other money that comes in later. That's completely unethical, and in this case, maybe even criminal. We'll find out when the jury comes back.
Well, and I think the defense here, they're putting a lot into this idea that Girardi wasn't aware of what was going on with his CFO, Christopher Kamon, and that Kamon stole lots of money. And I think the prosecutor did a good job yesterday of pointing out that, look, even if Kamon did steal money, that doesn't make Girardi innocent, which we've been talking about over the last few days as we've covered this trial. Just because one thing is true doesn't mean that the logical continuance that the defense wants you to follow through, and that is, if Christopher Kamon stole money, therefore Tom Girardi was incapable of stealing money. That doesn't make sense logically, because they both could steal money. And so the way that the prosecutor did this in closing was quite good, because he says, look, it doesn't make Tom Girardi innocent if Kamon stole. It just makes Girardi and Keese a den of thieves.
Yeah, great words.
Wow.
Yeah, I love the imagery of that, a den of thieves. And you do kind of get the sense that that's what it was, a den of thieves. The prosecutor also said that Mr. Girardi needed somebody who was morally flexible. And that's what he found in Kamon, right? Somebody who clearly was morally flexible. He also pointed out that it was Girardi, not Kamon, who wrote letters and voicemails and left voicemails to clients, blaming their missing settlement checks on tax issues and judges' approvals and all these other things. We didn't see one shred of evidence throughout this entire trial where Girardi got on the phone or sent an email to Kamon saying, hey, this client says that they're missing their money. Where is it? How come you haven't paid them? You're the CFO. I don't understand what's going on. Not one shred of evidence of that.
Yeah, that's the downfall here for Tom Girardi, is that he was actively lying to clients, and that's the evidence that came out in the trial. The one that's special to me is the tax issue one, where he told his female client that he couldn't give her distribution for her settlement because he was working through an IRS issue where the IRS taxes women on these types of settlements, but not men.
Right.
And it's like...
And he told her it was a very unfair tax issue. Well, indeed, it would be.
If it was true.
If it was true.
And then, the judge's required approval, that's horrible, because how does the client check that? If your lawyer's telling you, sorry, the judge still needs to approve this. And again, what Girardi was doing, I think, I can't get inside his head completely, but I think from what the evidence we can extrapolate, he was going from one big case to the next big case to pay off the old clients. So he had to keep the clients on the string long enough so that he could ultimately pay them off a year down the road, a year and a half down the road. In the meantime, he was making sure that he was very comfortable. I think he bought his wife a pair of earrings that cost a reasonable sum of $750,000. I think that came out in the testimony.
Terrible.
It's horrible to think about. There was also I don't remember the name of the young man. He actually was a young child. He was injured, and his family needed to buy a special bathtub so they could bathe him. And because they couldn't get the settlement money, they couldn't get this bathtub. And so the mom, all they had was a shower in their apartment. They couldn't shower in there. He's in a hospital bed. So the mom had to bathe him in his hospital bed. And she talked about how difficult that was. And my heart just goes out to this family. And they never did. They were supposed to get $1 million or something along those lines. They never received a penny. And yet Tom Girardi is going to these beautiful parties. He's got private aircraft. He's buying stuff for his wife. He's funding his wife's career, if you want to call it that. I mean, there's just all of this nonsense going on, and real innocent victims are being hurt by a man who promised to help them.
And I bet that bathtub didn't cost $750,000.
No.
You know, I mean, whatever it was. And the prosecution points out that, look, Tom Girardi made his living charming people, being persuasive, and he really knows how to push people off and delay. You know, the prosecutor said he's the king of that. Now, the defense comes in, and they ask the question, why would Girardi spend client money when he was so successful? Why would a man like this, you know, resort to fraud? He didn't need to cheat to win, is what the defense attorney said. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, and this, again, is the defense doing their best job. And again, I don't think they're logically sound in their arguments, because they're basically saying two different things in a sentence and saying if one is true, then the other must be true. And so he's saying, look, Tom Girardi worked hard. He was very successful, which is true. He did work hard. We don't know if he worked ethically hard, but he worked hard. He put time in. He was very good in front of jurors. He could persuade people. Look, the guy was talented. There's no doubt about it. But the second part of that sentence is, so he wouldn't need to commit fraud. That makes no logical sense at all. Somebody could be all the things that they were saying about Tom Girardi, a hard worker and good at what he does. But if he's a bad person, if he's morally bankrupt, he still can be a bad person. And I think that's where you look at the evidence in this case. And what you see is Tom Girardi telling multiple clients very strange stories about why he can't give them their settlement. Keith, if you and I are relatively sophisticated people, if Tom Girardi told me that he couldn't give me a distribution for my son who had been gravely injured in an accident, I mean, you and I, even us, would have had, you know, how do we handle that? These are people that are not lawyers.
Yeah.
They're probably, most of the time, they're not all that well off. And they're just at the mercy of this man. And it's just awful to think that these people were harmed and not made whole when these settlements came in.
No, I mean, he was the king of personal injury. I mean, you know, before all this happened, you know, back in 2015, 2016, if he had told you or I the same thing, we probably would have said, well, he must be right. I mean, over time, maybe you get the sense that, no, he's not right. But it would be very hard to resist that. And it's true that he was very successful, and that somebody who is that successful doesn't need to commit fraud, and yet they still do. And why is that? Because it's just not enough, I guess. I mean, if you get $10 million for your client and you're entitled to 40%, $4 million, is $4 million not enough for you? Well, you know, for some people it's not. And they want the other $6 million that the client's supposed to get too. So it's true that somebody at that level of success doesn't need to commit fraud. It does not answer the question, but did they commit fraud anyway because they wanted more? And that's the ultimate question that the jury has to answer here, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Did he commit wire fraud? And I think the prosecutor did a great job of bundling this together as a Ponzi scheme to show that this was a plan, and it was something that was done regularly at the firm over many years. I think the jury is going to come back and say, we're going to hold him accountable for this. Now,
there has been, you know, some back and forth about the money that Girardi put back in, and I saw different amounts in the closing. I guess his defense attorney said Girardi put $100,000 back into the firm. I've heard 80. You know, I don't know.
$100 million or $100,000?
Oh, I'm sorry, $100 million.
Yeah,
not
okay.
$100,000.
Yeah,
might as well have been $100,000.
Yeah.
But $100 million back in the firm, which, you know, I don't think even began to scratch the surface of what was owed to clients, because I know that there's still many clients who are not going to be made whole. And I kind of get the sense that, okay, I don't care what he put back in. Let's just say it is $100 million. It's too late. And the only reason he did it was at the very end, once he was caught, in order to try to escape probably criminal prosecution and get all these lawsuits off of his back. But who cares? I mean, even in the Madoff scandal, they did get some money back from Madoff. They did seize his assets. It wasn't near enough to make everybody whole. People still lost a tremendous amount of money, but some people got some money back. Does that mean Madoff's, you know, not a criminal? I don't think so. And same here. I mean, does that mean that Tom Girardi, you know, shouldn't be found guilty because he gave $100 million back? I don't buy it.
Yeah, no, 2 points on that is, the first is, if you take clients' money without authorization and then you put it back, say 2 or 3 years later, the State Bar of California is still going to want to have a very serious conversation
Right.
with you. And they may even be saying, you're going to lose your license to practice law because you can't be trusted with other people's money. So that would be one factor there. I guess the other factor I would say is that if he is at a point where he's putting money back into the firm, but there are still people that did not get anything at the end of the day, then there wasn't enough put back in the firm. But shouldn't have taken it in the first place if he did take it. And I think the evidence here supports that he did take money that he wasn't entitled to. And then what about the people that still were not made whole, even if he did put money back into the firm?
Yeah. I mean, if you rob a bank and you get caught and you give the money back, you still are guilty of robbing a bank. So, that's really what it comes down to. So then the defense attorney moved on to the fact that the firm's finances were extraordinarily complicated and Girardi's office was disorganized. And so again, I guess the idea is, well, because it was so chaotic, that's where Kamon was able to come in and pull a fast one on Girardi. But, that kind of falls flat with me just because as a lawyer, it's up to you to make sure that client money is handled appropriately. You cannot hide behind the fact that your office is disorganized, your accounting is complicated, you're not doing things in a way that is understandable. No. This is your obligation. You must do these things. So you can't just say, well, it was a mess. What was I to do?
Well, let's just assume for a minute that Tom Girardi is 100% innocent and that he was not taking money from his clients and he was a good steward and a good lawyer and cared about people. And he was just a little chaotic in the way he handled things. His office was messy. He didn't really understand how the accounting worked. Let's just assume all of that to be true. So then when, to your point yesterday, when we talked in a podcast, when clients called Tom Girardi and said, where's my money? And it's been a year since they've been paid. What should his response be? His response should be, well, you should have gotten your money. What are you talking about?
Let me look into this.
And hey, Mr. Kamon, why did these clients not get paid? But no, we see Tom Girardi telling these clients, he's spinning them a tale as to why they're not getting their settlement. Well, why is he spinning a tale? If he's innocent in all this, wouldn't he be just completely blown away by the fact that they're not getting their money and be upset about it if he truly cares about these people?
Yeah, you wouldn't be blaming it on taxes and some Supreme Court justice.
Right. You would actually do something about it. So his behavior does not show me somebody that didn't understand what was going on here.
Yeah. And then the defense also said that he specifically told the jury, your decision in this case will forever alter the trajectory of Mr. Girardi's life. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't really feel too bad about that if I were on the jury.
Well, what about all the people's trajectory of their lives where they didn't get their settlement money that they needed for health care and hospital beds and showers and things? These are people that have been gravely injured and injured forever. They're not ever going to get better. And so they just need things that will comfort them along the way, minimal things like a hospital bed and a bathtub and those types of things. These people's lives were changed forever as well.
That's important to note is that the money that was recovered on these personal injury settlements, the reason you get that money is because you've been harmed and you need money to take care of yourself and the damages and the burns and the injuries. And this isn't just free money that you won in Vegas, because you sat down and you're really good at poker or something. I mean, this is real money that's used for real injuries. So it really is a shame. And then the defense finally said that, I think you said earlier, Stuart, that Girardi's, the lights were on, but nobody's home. And that's the reason why the prosecution wanted Girardi off the stand as quickly as possible. Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I think the prosecution asked all the questions they wanted to ask, and quite frankly, they got some pretty damning testimony out of Girardi in the sense that he was just so adamant that he did nothing wrong.
Yeah, and again, we can talk about this backwards and forwards. This guy appears to know what was happening. The evidence is very strong and shows that he knew what was happening and lied about it to clients, and I'm not sure why he did that, but the lights were on and nobody was home. This is shifting from the Christopher Kamon defense to the capacity defense, and they're just simply saying, look, he didn't have the ability to appreciate and understand this. Even his own medical expert, when she was cross-examined on the stand, asked, was he incapable of committing fraud? And her answer was, I do not know.
Right.
I mean, and so when you have a medical expert saying that, and of course they've only been able to show that there was a car accident apparently in 2017 when some people started to know a difference in him. But these crimes go all the way back to 2010, and I think the defense has had a hard time going back and explaining again why it is that he's telling clients these tall tales. And then you've got, unfortunately, unfortunately for Tom Girardi, you've got some video evidence from the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills all the way to 2019, 2020, where he is talking and he sounds very capacitated. He's lucid. Yeah, he's persuasive in what he's saying, and he talks about how you have to persuade juries. That doesn't sound like somebody who's suffering. That doesn't sound like the lights were on, but nobody was home.
No, absolutely not. And I think the rebuttal might have been the strongest part of the closing yesterday when they really got up. And there's kind of 3 points that I can summarize, which is they told the jury, look at the lies. Look at the lies that Tom Girardi said to the clients. Look at the amount of money he was spending, a tremendous amount of money that he was spending. And, you kind of put that all together with the fact that he was not an absentee landlord. In other words, he was the man at Girardi and Keese. Nobody else was in charge. And we heard this testimony from his own secretaries. Nobody else was in charge. He alone could sign on the trust account. And I know there was testimony about signature stamps and everything, but I think even his own personnel said, no, Tom Girardi was in charge. He called the shots. So when you put those 3 concepts together, the lies, just the sheer amount of money he was spending, and the fact that nobody else was in charge of this operation, only Tom Girardi, I think that really paints the strongest picture as to why he should be found guilty here.
Yeah, and so now the jury got their instructions, and I think they got some time yesterday to deliberate. Obviously, the courts tend to close down fairly early in the afternoon, and so we'll see what happens today. I know you're saying by lunchtime, but let's see. There could be the one caveat I would say about any jury is sometimes there's 1 or 2 people that are just cantankerous and they need to go through the process and through the system. But I have faith in the jury for several reasons on this case. One being that the people that were injured here, we can all agree, were sympathetic victims, and we all care about them. Society cares about these people, and they were harmed and hurt by somebody that was supposed to help them. So it's going to be hard in my mind to find a juror that's going to go, I think Tom Girardi's a good guy, and I'm going to stand up for him because this is, in my mind, despicable conduct.
Yeah, it really is. And I would, of course, encourage the jury to take all the time they need, and even if they don't decide today, if it takes them a couple days, that's the process, and they should take the time that they need to find an answer. But I just don't see a whole lot of evidence for Tom Girardi in this case that is just stand out that shows that clearly he's innocent in this. And so I guess from my perspective, it just seems to me that it's so clear cut that I don't know, it seems like it wouldn't be a long deliberation. But you never know. Everybody has their process. Everybody has their own way of feeling comfortable. And it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback out here on the outside. It's much harder to be in the jury room deliberating and taking that responsibility on your shoulders where your decision really is going to affect somebody's life. And so I think most people who act as jurors, a vast majority of them, take that responsibility very seriously, and as they should. And so it might take a little bit longer, but we'll find out.
We will. The one thing that's interesting, and this is not so much on the Tom Girardi matter, is that we've actually hired mock jurors in the past, where we've done an opening statement in front of them, and then we've had the defense get up and do an opening statement, and then we get to go behind what's kind of mirror? It's a double pane mirror.
Yeah, the single way mirrors.
Anyway,
and watch how the sausage is made.
And we get to watch the jury deliberate.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time we did this, and I was just shocked at the things that the jury would talk about, the jurors, because they would talk about things that I'd be like, that's not relevant. That's not I didn't talk about that. Even the defense didn't talk about that. Why are they talking about that? And one thing we learned in that is that you have to arm the jurors because you're only going to have 6 jurors on your side out of a 12-member panel in any case. And then as the case goes along, hopefully you're getting a couple more. But ultimately, you have to arm jurors. And one thing we found is that there's some very loud people in this world. And those loud people, they would take over the deliberation process. And if they were on our side, that was fantastic. But if they weren't on our side, well, that made us nervous. And so what you have to do is you have to arm the people. And you don't know which 6 you're arming, what 7 or 8 jurors you're arming. But these are the things that were happening yesterday here, and that is Ponzi scheme. sympathetic old man, lights on, nobody's home. These are ways that jurors can take these same arguments and go into the deliberations, and they can argue with one another. So you want to make sure your arguments are sound. You want to repeat them. You want to have a theme, and you hope that the jurors that are favorable to you will take that message into the deliberations and hopefully get a resolution. Now, again, I feel this case is pretty solid against Mr. Girardi, and I think the jury is going to come back against him. But because we were so surprised when we first started doing this about what jurors talk about, anything could happen. But I think the percentages are in favor of a guilty verdict.
And when you say arming jurors, you mean give them the talking points and the arguments so that they can help persuade the other people? And would one good example of that be a den of thieves? Is that what you're talking about?
That's right. So you want to give people, an overarching argument to be able to talk about. So generally what we saw was when we didn't arm jurors, when we didn't even understand this concept, when we didn't give them the arguments they needed, there would be a loud guy. And I remember there was one of these loud jurors, and he was telling the other jurors as we watched them deliberate. And again, this is a mock thing. This is not a real deal. We're not allowed to watch juries.
Right.
But because we're going to present to a real jury, we want to kind of figure out what the good arguments are. But as we watched this loud guy, I remember we didn't really talk about preponderance of evidence. We didn't really talk about what it was the burden of proof and how that works. And so when they went back to deliberate, this very loud juror goes, well, in these cases, and he started trying to describe the criminal standard. He didn't do it very artfully.
Yeah.
But he talked about how we really needed more evidence to prove, and it has to be almost a slam dunk. And that's when it was like, ding, ding, ding. Oh, when we go back to the next set of mock jurors, we need to make sure that we're talking about the burden of proof. And that's where we talked about, we used football analogies. You got to get your nose over the 50-yard line. It's just a little bit greater than 50%. It's literally an F on your term paper in college, and you win at trial. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. If you believe our story just a teensy bit more than you believe the other side, you must find in our favor. That's what the jury instructions say. Once we fixed that, and once we started talking to jurors about that, now in deliberations, and I remember the next set of deliberations, there was kind of a diminutive older lady, and she was there. You could tell she was smart and cerebral, but she just wasn't loud and obnoxious.
Right.
And sure enough, there was a loud and obnoxious juror that said something that was wrong. And this lady goes, no, no, no.
Yes.
And no, because she's now armed. She now has knowledge, and she's able to express in the jury room. That's not how this works. And one thing we've done in closing arguments too, Keith, is we've told the jurors, in fact, in voir dire, when we're interviewing the jurors to see if they want to be see if they fit the case, we'll ask them, hey, if anybody in the back brings up something that's not relevant or not allowed to be discussed, are you willing to tell that person, hey, Mr. Jones, you shouldn't be talking about that. You shouldn't be bringing that up. So if somebody's talking about the criminal standard for burden of proof, saying we need a lot more proof here than the preponderance of the evidence, which is 50.0001%, yeah, for civil cases, are you willing to tell that juror that? And if that juror continues to cause problems and say you got to have the criminal standard here, are you willing to ask for the judge to come in and talk to that juror? And I don't know if a judge would come in, but we say that, and we want the jurors to say, yes, I'm willing to do that, because you want people that are willing to stand up to the bullies in these jury deliberations and be able to have a voice. And so when you arm the jurors, good things happen, because now they can take your arguments and they can use them as their own in the back, because they're convinced by your arguments.
Yeah, and so they become your advocate in that room in terms of arguing for that position that they honestly believe in, but so do you in terms of being able to arm them. Well, this is all very interesting. I can't wait to see what the verdict's going to be. Will it be Ponzi scheme or will it be sick old man? We're probably going to find out in the next day or two. And when we do, we will do another summary and give you a recap and sum up the whole trial after the verdict.